Hello, and welcome to Hard Conversations. This is a podcast about male sexuality, intimacy, and sex positivity, where we unpack the taboo topic of erectile issues in a safe, non-judgmental space. And now, here's your host, sex therapist, Timothy Norton.
Hello, and welcome to Hard Conversations. Could not be more excited for my next guest, Barry McCarthy. Barry McCarthy is a board-certified clinical psychologist, certified marital and sex therapist, and a tenured professor of psychology at American University. His clinical expertise focused on integrating sex therapy strategies and techniques into individual and couples therapy, assessment, and treatment of the most common male and female sexual problems, and a special expertise in the treatment of sexual desire disorders. Dr. McCarthy earned his BA from Loyola University, his MA and PhD from Southern Illinois. His professional memberships include the American Psychological Association, American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, Society for Sex Therapy and Research, and the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies. He is a diplomat in sex therapy, earning this from the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. As a leading expert in this field, Dr. McCarthy has presented over 450 workshops around the world, and his extensive list of publications includes over 120 professional articles, 32 book chapters, and co-authorship of 16 books, including Finding Your Sexual Voice, Celebrating Female Sexuality, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Sexual Dysfunction, Sex Made Simple, Enduring Desire, Discovering Your Couple Sexual Style, Men's Sexual Health, Coping with Erectile Dysfunction, Getting It Right the First Time, and Coping with Premature Ejaculation. In 2016, Barry received the Masters & Johnson Award for Lifetime Contribution to the Sexuality Field. Wow. Hello and welcome to Hard Conversations, Barry.
Well, I'm very glad to be here.
Great.
Talk about erections and desire problems.
All right, perfect. Let's just get into it. The reason I know your name is because one of the first books that I was handed when learning how to be a sex therapist was Coping with Erectile Dysfunction, which you wrote with Metz and rest in peace. And the other one was Coping with Premature Ejaculation. And I got to say, I mean, I haven't been doing this nearly as long as you, but I've given those books to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Have you gotten a lot of thanks for writing those?
Well, those books were more Michael's books than my books. Michael is the one who developed the concept of good enough sex, which I think is the core issue in understanding male sexuality and male erectile problems. But yes, it still sells. It kind of amazes us.
Yeah. And so if that was something, I'm giving away this book that you guys wrote. What would you consider your number one resource to hand out to guys for this kind of thing?
Well, in terms of problems, it is the Coping with Erectile Dysfunction book. Mm-hmm. In terms of healthy sexuality, it's a book that I wrote with Mike Metz called Men's Sexual Health, about preventing problems, about a new approach to male sexuality. And I think that's really important, that the way I learned about sex, and I think the way most men learn about sex, works fine as an adolescent. It works fine as a young adult. It works terrible as an adult, especially an adult in an ongoing relationship. So this notion of totally predictable autonomous sexual performance, that's the theme of what real male sexuality is. It's reinforced still in the environment. It's very much reinforced in porn videos, that a man always has an erection. He's ready to have sex with any woman, anytime, and any place. And that is crazy making.
It really is.
One of the things that most people don't know, including sex educators and sex therapists, is that when couples stop being sexual, especially after age 40, it's almost always the man's decision. It isn't a joint decision. And he's made it because he's lost his comfort and confidence with erections, intercourse, and orgasm. And he says to himself, I don't want to start something I can't finish. And that's very self-defeating.
It is. It's very sad.
It is very sad. Again, let me give you both a positive statistic and a sad statistic. The positive statistic is there's good science now that it's clear that you can be sexual, not just in your 20s and 30s, but in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. The bad news is about 1 out of 3 men stop being sexual in their 60s, 2 out of 3 in their 70s. And the major cause of that is to feel that they're a failure sexually, that they can't have sex the way, quotes, real men are supposed to have sex.
And so that book that you're talking about, it gives a lot of information about how to think differently about male sexuality.
Right. And that the key to male sexuality, as it is to the key to female sexuality, is that the essence of sexuality is not performance. I'm always in favor of intercourse, orgasm, erections, totally in favor, no hidden agendas. But that's not the essence. The essence of sexuality, the new mantra sexually, is desire, pleasure, eroticism, and satisfaction. And the most important thing is desire. That you look forward to being sexual, you feel that you deserve for sex to work in your life, even if it is not perfect sex. And that is a message that the culture doesn't say to men. It's a message that the drug companies don't say to men, but it is the key to staying sexual throughout your life.
Desire
is the first.
Pleasure, eroticism.
Pleasure is the second. And eroticism, I'm a big fan of eroticism. It's integral to sexuality. And then the last one is feeling satisfied. And feeling satisfied means you feel good about yourself as a person. You feel more energized and bonded as a sexual couple. And that is not contingent on perfect performance.
Yeah, you write, I think, pretty extensively, and you presented extensively on this topic as well of inhibited sexual desire.
Right. The new term is low desire, but I like inhibited desire.
Okay, low desire, low libido.
Right. But you know what happens with so many men is that they attach desire to a spontaneous erection. And the learning is you go to intercourse and orgasm on your first erection. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, except when it becomes a mandate. If you look at the typical man who's been in a relationship and is over, let's say, over age 30 or age 40, that often his desire comes not from spontaneous erections, it comes from giving and receiving pleasure-oriented touching. And that the major reason that men fail at Viagra, and if you want, we can talk about Cialis versus Viagra. I have very strong opinions about that.
Yeah, definitely.
But the reason he fails is as soon as he gets an erection, in other words, his subjective arousal on a 10-point scale is like a 4 or 5. That's when you get an erection. He immediately rushes to intercourse because he's afraid he's going to lose the erection. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. That the drug companies basically lie to men. What the drug companies say to the man is, you'll get erections like you did in your 20s. It's not true. You'll get, when you're aroused, your erection will last longer, but you're not going to get those totally predictable spontaneous erections. And it's funny because the good enough sex model really sells with female clients and female clinicians. It doesn't sell very well with the drug companies, with male physicians, or even male therapists, but certainly not male friends.
The good enough sex model.
The good enough sex model. And what that talks about is it's a couple-oriented model, and that for 85% of encounters, sex flows from comfort to pleasure to arousal to erotic flow to intercourse to orgasm. But when it doesn't flow, rather than panicking or apologizing, which is incredibly anti-erotic for both the man and the woman, what the man does is he turns toward his partner. This is also true of gay men, not just straight men. He turns toward his partner and says, it isn't going to be an intercourse night, but let's make it either a sensual sex night or let's make it an erotic non-intercourse night. But I'm not going to apologize. And we can still have a good time.
I love that. And I love how that starts with comfort.
Right.
And because one of the things that is so challenging is if we're expecting this spontaneous erection to occur just anywhere in the world, people learn quickly that it doesn't always happen. It often doesn't happen.
Especially after age 40, it doesn't. You know, one of the things, again, that is not talked about at all among either therapists or male clients or couples is that the great majority of men, by the time they reach 40 or 45, have had at least one sensitizing experience. And what that means is he doesn't get an erection sufficient for intercourse. Now, that can happen in your teens or your 20s, but it's much more likely to happen in your 30s and 40s. The key element after a sensitizing experience is you don't go back to autonomous sex. You can't. What the drug companies promise is not going to happen. You're not going to go back to totally predictable autonomous sex. What you can do is you can be a much better lover, a much better sexual partner. But that you've got to accept this concept of variable, flexible male and couple sexuality.
Yeah.
And I say to my men, you can be a traditional man and you'll stop being sexual in your 50s and 60s. Or you can be a wise man and you can be sexual in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. And wise men embrace good enough sex, and when they turn toward their partner as their intimate and erotic friend, not as somebody to perform for.
There are so many golden tidbits here that you're offering. It's hard for me to remember all of the questions because I'm taking notes here on things I want to say in sessions. No, this is really wonderful.
One of the things that is very important that I want your listeners to hear loud and clear is that when you're talking about penile stimulation, I'm a big fan of penile stimulation, but it's only erotic when your subjective arousal is 4 or 5 on that 10-point scale. If you are not turned on and your partner says, I'm going to turn you on, I'm going to give you the best oral sex in the history of California, it's probably going to be counterproductive. You're probably not only not going to get turned on, but you're going to feel more self-conscious. And there's nothing more anti-erotic than self-consciousness. So what I think of as basic facts about male sexuality and couple sexuality, so many people, including physicians and therapists, are not that aware of or comfortable with.
And so what should the partner be doing in that situation?
I think that it isn't her job or her partner's job to turn him on and give him an erection. What the partner's role is to be both an intimate and an erotic ally. That says, let's enjoy each other, let's enjoy touching. Again, the hope is it's going to flow into intercourse and orgasm. And if it doesn't flow, I still want you to stay with me. I don't want you to turn away from me. And I want to have either a sensual experience or a playful experience or an erotic non-intercourse experience. It can be mutual or it can be asynchronous. But I want to have fun with you sexually, and I want you to have fun with me sexually.
And what kinds of things tend to slow that process down or make that process more challenging?
The major distraction, the major turnoff is where you're always monitoring your penis. Is your penis responding the way it's supposed to respond or not? And that it takes you out of the pleasure eroticism process and it puts you into a performance orientation. Performance anxiety, both anticipatory and performance anxiety, is the major reason that males develop and maintain erectile problems. And erectile problems lead to inhibited desire.
And
the major cause of inhibited desire for adult men is erectile problems.
And then it's Then it's a vicious loop.
It's a terribly vicious loop. Think about it positively first, then let's talk about it negatively.
Okay.
So positively, what you want a man to be doing is you want him to anticipate he's going to have fun. It's going to be a pleasure-oriented experience. And he really does get into not just turning on the partner one-way stimulation, but he's open to giving and receiving stimulation. And then as arousal builds, that's when you talk about eroticism and erotic flow. And if your listeners want to take one specific technique from today's podcast, it is do not transition to intercourse until your subjective arousal is about a 7 or an 8. So many men, as soon as he gets an erection, rush intercourse and they lose their erection. And then, especially for men in their over 40, a key element in enjoying intercourse is giving and receiving multiple stimulation during intercourse. So it isn't like in your 18 or 22 where you're worried about premature ejaculation, when you don't want additional stimulation. As an adult man, you want to give and receive additional stimulation. The most common stimulation that the man receives is testicle stimulation. The most common he gives is clitoral stimulation to his partner. But actually, the most common multiple stimulation for both men and women is using erotic fantasies during couple sex. That's normal and healthy. It serves as a bridge to keep you more involved in the couple sex you're having.
Using erotic fantasy, like verbally and talking about it, or just kind of thinking about it?
Well, for most people, most of the time, again, one of my favorite lines is sexually one size never fits all. Mm-hmm. But for most people, most of the time, one of the best ways of losing the erotic charge of fantasy is verbalizing and playing it out. For most people, what makes the fantasy erotic is that it's totally different than who you really are and what you really want to be doing, but it's very charged. So enjoy your erotic fantasies. Don't feel shameful, don't feel guilty about it.
Some people,
but most of the time, you want to keep them private. It works so much better.
Right, but in keeping them private, a lot of people feel that's kind of disconnecting.
Well, the best way of thinking about that is in a healthy relationship, a healthy sexual interchange. It's a bridge to increased pleasure and increased eroticism. In an unhealthy use of fantasy, it serves as a wall to keep you walled off from your partner. But that in fact, it really allows you emotionally and physically to feel more present with your partner. That's the positive role of erotic fantasy. I know it's very controversial,
right?
And I know it can be really misused, but in general, that is true for the great majority of men in couples.
And so the couple would have to get on the same page about that they're trying to build that bridge.
They don't have to be on the same page. One of the better things for them to say is, I want you to have a good time, sensually, playfully, erotically, intercourse-wise, orgasmically. And I don't care what you use internally to have a good time. That's okay, as long as it doesn't negate me or negate us.
As long as it doesn't negate me. But it's another woman or it's another man.
No, it is another person. Nobody again, let me be blunt.
Okay.
Nobody fantasizes about having intercourse in their bedroom in the missionary position with their partner. Nobody does. By its nature, erotic fantasies are non-socially acceptable sexual behaviors and feelings. But it has a positive role in people's lives if they let it have a positive role in their lives. Let me say one other myth that I want to make sure we talk about.
Please.
And that is that, the best sex is mutual synchronous sex. And what you mean by that is both you and your partner feel desire, you both enjoy pleasure, you're both erotically turned on, and you're satisfied with the sexual experience. You feel good about yourself and more bonded. That's the best sex. But it's really important to understand that among happily married, sexually functional couples, less than 50% of their encounters are mutual and synchronous, that the majority of sex is better for one partner than the other. And for folks under 40, it's usually better for the man than the woman. The thing that's so interesting to me as I've gotten older and studied this more is that for folks over 60, asynchronous sex is typically better for the woman than the man. And that men who can accept that and feel good about it, that's my notion of the wise man, he learns to piggyback his arousal on his partner's arousal. And so it makes it for much better sex.
I really like the bluntness of that. There's a lot of pressure, I think, in the narrative about this to strive for total equality.
And that really kills sexual function and sexual desire. Sex is not a politically correct experience. The more you understand it has different roles and different meanings and different outcomes, the better off you're going to be.
Okay. But then, so there might be some female listeners out there saying, well, he has more orgasms than I do. That's not fair.
He does have more orgasms than you do. And again, one of the myths about female sexuality, because females, about 15 to 18% of women are multi-orgasmic. And the myth is that multi-orgasmic women are more satisfied than singly orgasmic women. It's not true. Scientifically, there's no evidence for that at all. Let me tell you a different approach. And again, I want to focus on male sexuality. Okay. Just a 2-minute detour.
Sure.
You know, our newest book that came out last 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, is called Finding Your Sexual Voice, Celebrating Female Sexuality. And that one of the things that we say in that, and really very much believe, we're not hypocrites, is that females, there are many more similarities sexually between men and women than there are differences. It's not true in socialization, it's not true growing up, it's not true in adolescence, but it is true in adulthood. And males do have more orgasms. That's correct. Their sexual functioning tends to be more predictable and reliable. But it doesn't mean that they have more desire or more satisfaction. And that the big issue with adult women, about 1 out of 3 adult women reports inhibited desire. And what we used to believe is the answer to inhibited desire is more orgasms. And it turns out that there's no truth to that at all. That the key element in female sexuality is her feeling like a first-class sexual woman and accepting the variability and flexibility of female sexuality.
Yeah.
So that's my little detour.
Great. And so if we equate satisfaction with orgasm, then we're going down the wrong road.
You're going down a performance road, which is the wrong road. I love orgasm. I love male orgasm. I love female orgasm. But sexual satisfaction is so much more than orgasm. And this idea of clinging to the performance model that says the way you had sex in your teens and your 20s is the right way to have sex in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s is absolutely destructive.
Okay, and this, at the beginning of one of your books, I was glancing through it, Rekindling Desire, said that you've worked with over 3,000 couples.
Right.
And that came out a while ago, so that number's presumably gone up since then. So would you say that a lot of what you're saying you're drawing on from that experience, or you also seem like you read the studies?
Yeah, I do read the studies. I go to the meetings. I still do. You know, I actually go to more meetings, do more workshops, and do more writing since I retired from clinical practice in 2012. So I practiced for 42 years, and sexuality and couple sexuality is my subspecialty. So I've seen all kinds of different folks.
Sure.
Both mainstream traditional value folks and gay folks and non-traditional value folks. And one of the things that I really do believe is that everybody deserves a first-class sexual life. And being self-accepting and developing a couple sexual style with your partner. Whether your partner is straight or gay, whether your partner is traditional or non-traditional. You want sex. Sex is very paradoxical in folks' lives. That when it works well, it's not a major factor. It plays this 15 to 20% role of feeling good about yourself as a person and energizing your bond. The paradox is that when sex is dysfunctional, conflictual, or you're fighting about it like affairs, or you're fighting about it with a shameful sexual secret, it plays an inordinately powerful negative role. It really breaks. So sex can't save a relationship, but it can break up a relationship.
Oh, that's too bad.
It is too bad. And sometimes it's actually the right decision, but most of the time, if people would actually disclose who their authentic sexual self is, with their strengths and their vulnerabilities, their partner is usually, and this is especially true of men, the woman is usually much, much more accepting of the man than he is accepting of himself. You know, sexual trauma occurs much more with women than it occurs with men. But it's also much, much more impactful and destructive for men than it is for women. In that it becomes his shameful secret. He basically never tells anybody, including his partner, about his trauma history. And that's a terrible mistake. That you need to honor your history, but don't give it control over you. You are much more sexually than your trauma is. Your trauma is part of your authentic sexual self, but don't give it control. And I know this all sounds too easy, way too easy, but I really think it's true.
Yeah, no, it doesn't sound easy to me. I think as a couples sex therapist, you probably heard about a lot of sexual trauma or a lot of non-sexual trauma. How do you generally, I guess that's a really difficult question, but how do you work with trauma?
Well, I work with it in two ways. And again, this is way too simplistic, and it's much more challenging than that for people. But the one is a clear message to them that you want to be a proud survivor. You don't want to be an angry, anxious, or depressed victim. And the cognition is that living well is the best revenge. But that the best way of dealing with your history is actually processing it with somebody who you trust. Well, that's your best friend, it is your partner, or it is a therapist, where you can tell the whole story about who you are psychologically, relationally, and sexually, and feel you're accepted. That makes it so much easier to then take the step of saying, I want to be a proud survivor. And that feeling that you cannot get a do-over, you cannot change the past. You can learn from the past, you can honor it, but you can't change it. Your power for change is in the present and future. And in a healthy relationship, when you experience again desire, pleasure, eroticism, and satisfaction, you've taken back control of your sexuality. It doesn't reside back in the trauma.
I'll get that question a lot when I'm seeing an individual and they're processing their own trauma and they wonder how much to share with their partner about what happened to them.
The easy answer is share all of the themes. Do not share the details. What happens when people share the details is it usually resensitizes them and they feel more and more controlled by the past. When they share all the themes, it really does free them to be the authentic sexual person that they want to be in the present. You know, one of the things that is, again, easy to say, hard to implement, is that the challenge for folks, whether they're married or they're partnered, whether they're straight or they're gay, is how you integrate intimacy and eroticism into the same relationship. And that part of the issue with intimacy is it's about feeling warm, close, and secure. Totally different experience than eroticism. Eroticism is all about taking risks, breaking boundaries. It's mystery, it's creativity. It's not socially acceptable. It's an interesting issue. In terms of the past, sharing feelings about yourself, the intimate feelings, I think are really, really helpful. Sharing the erotic details, including the sexual abuse and trauma, is really destructive for most people most of the time.
Okay, that's really helpful. And we keep talking a lot about couples going through these experiences. Do you prefer when there is an issue like erectile malfunctioning, do you prefer to work with a couple?
Yes, far and away. I think you not only get better results when you see intimacy and sexuality as a couple issue rather than a man's issue. It's a couple issue, but you get much less relapse. And it's partly because in doing couple therapy, you really are trying to build a bridge in a couple that says we're both intimate and erotic friends. So many men, and I know I don't want to overstate this, but it is true, so many men feel intimately connected to their partner, but they have de-eroticized their partner. That they see her as a good person, a good spouse, a good mother, somebody to share feelings with, but not somebody to share eroticism. And that in healthy relationships, you value both intimacy and pleasuring and eroticism. So I think that works much better as a couple.
Yeah. Oh, that's another great piece of advice. And I guess a lot of the times I'll be on the phone with the guy and he said he wants to come in for individual, and I'll nudge him toward bringing in his partner. But a lot of time the guy just wants to sort this out on his own. And then I guess it's kind of a compartmentalization, and then take it home and show his partner, hey, my dick is fixed.
Well, he's performing for his partner. He sees his partner as somebody who's judging him, and he's going to win her over or him over. It's not a good way of doing it. Let me make a specific suggestion for clinicians watching this. And that is, in that first phone call, to say to them, I've done this a while, and what my experience has been is that if we do a 4-session assessment, I can make a good recommendation of whether you should come alone or as a couple. In the 4-session assessment, the first session is done as a couple, and then you do individual psychological, relational, and sexual histories. If you do the history with the partner in the room, you're not going to get the genuine narrative. You're not going to get the truth. You're going to get a sanitized version. Again, I've done a lot of these. I've done well over probably 4,000 of them. 85% of people have sensitive or secret material they haven't shared with their partner. And so I want to know what it is. And then with the 4th session is we talk about them as individuals, about what are their strengths, what are their vulnerabilities, as a couple, what are their strengths and vulnerabilities, and make a recommendation. Usually the recommendation is to work as a couple, but not always. Sometimes it is much better to work with the man alone.
Okay. And I want to go back to eroticizing a partner. We were just talking about that. And I feel like when I was first starting out, I was on the lookout for a seminar on how do you teach someone how to re-eroticize their partner once they've become the family member or, the mother or the sister. Like when you've, for the listener, that when you've been with somebody a long time, you stop seeing them as a sexual object, and because they've done so many things for you. They've raised your children, and they've, you guys go to the library together, and you do lots of non-sexual things.
Right. But which is a good thing to do.
Which is great, which is the hallmark of a long-lasting relationship. But so how do you...
In a vital, resilient sexual desire, eroticism is an integral part of it. And again, we've got to be blunt here in that the way eroticism is portrayed in movies, in porn, in novels, is not in fact healthy integrated eroticism. What integrated eroticism is about is that you own your sexual voice, and you are inviting your partner to share in that sexual voice. And that You don't split it. You don't compartmentalize it. One of the things that I hear over and over again, and this is probably more true because you're in Los Angeles, right?
I am.
Yeah, so you're closer to Las Vegas than we are in North Carolina or Washington, D.C., where I practice. Is so many men will go to Las Vegas and they'll pay somebody $250 and they'll get an erection. And the reason that they do that is that they see it's the woman's role. I gave you $250, you owe me an erection. So it reduces the performance anxiety. You can do that with your intimate partner, whether it's just married or a sexual friend, where you say to your intimate partner, you don't owe me an erection, but what we owe each other is to have a good time in terms of pleasuring, in terms of playfulness, and in terms of eroticism. And that one of the things that becomes important is rather than our assuming of what is really a turn on, is that we'll do psychosexual skill exercises, which I'm a big fan of, to try to identify what are erotic turn-ons for each of us. And the big key element is it can't be at the expense of your partner or the expense of the relationship. And for most people, the thing that feeds eroticism is called partner interaction arousal. The more aroused you are, the more aroused your partner is. But for some, it's also self-entrancement arousal of taking turns, one of you turns on the other one. But the key thing that I'd really like you to hear is that everybody has their own erotic voice. So for example, in the media, the assumption is all men, 99.9% of men, really like being filleted. You've heard that?
Sure.
I think that's what people believe. Again, there's not great science, but probably somewhere around 1 out of 5 men is uncomfortable receiving oral sex. He would never tell that to his partner, but it's the truth. Part of eroticism is you're being honest with yourself and your partner about what really does work for you. But what I think the keyest element with eroticism is that you've got a solid base of feeling comfortable and pleasure, and then the eroticism is integrated.
So I can hear a guy sitting there saying, okay, well, what turns me on is, porn, watching somebody else have sex. So how am I going to share that with my partner?
Well, let me give you the overview with porn. The way of understanding porn is it's an erotic fantasy gear. So we talk in our writing about 5 gears of touching: affectionate touch, sensual touch, playful touch, erotic touch, and intercourse touch. Think about porn as like a supercharged 6th gear. It's an erotic fantasy gear. And what works in porn is totally different than works in real life sexuality. The reason that people do well with porn is it's often attached to masturbation, but it's also attached to you letting yourself let go and really go with the erotic fantasy. What makes porn problematic for people is where they make this differentiation between fantasy and reality. In that what works in fantasy often, and in fact, usually does not work in reality. And what happens with porn is you get this combination of about the 15% of men who misuse porn, is that it's high degrees of secrecy, high degrees of eroticism, and high degrees of shame. You put that together, it's like taking a cancer pill or a poison pill. Yeah. Now, there are couples who will use porn together as a way of having an erotic turn-on, but it usually works better if they played before and they're already open and receptive, and then the porn is like a supercharged gear.
They watch it individually before? Or they watch
No.
Okay.
They play with each other, and then together they turn on the porn video to a scene that they find erotic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem with traditional porn is it gives a really crazy message about women.
Yeah. That
the crazier the woman, the more erotic she is, and the crazier the situation, the more erotic she is. If you can understand it's about fantasy and not think it's about reality, you're not going to get in trouble. when you blur those lines, you get it. And especially when you add shame. You know, of all the emotions, shame is the most destructive for men and women, but especially for
Mm-hmm. The biggest libido killer.
men. It is a libido killer, but it also, this combination of secrecy, eroticism, and shame is very powerful and very destructive.
Yeah, really isolating.
It is isolating, and it doesn't serve as a bridge to anywhere. It serves as a bridge to you feeling more isolated and shameful.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. There's so much good stuff in here. We spoke earlier about Viagra, and you said you were in private practice for 42 years, so there was a good couple of decades before Viagra came out.
That's correct. And I've also almost 15 years when Viagra was out.
Yeah.
So here's what, let's say it positively first. Okay?
Yes.
The advantage, let me tell you one, let's start positively with why Cialis for most men is a better medication.
Okay.
And that is, it fits better into your couple sexual style of intimacy, pleasuring, and eroticism. The problem with Viagra is that you have this narrow window of opportunity for desire, basically an hour to 4 hour opportunity window. It works well for procrastinators and people who like structure, but it works less well for most couples, where Cialis gives you much more degrees of freedom in terms of windows of opportunity. And the other is, the notion with Viagra is that it gives you an erection. It doesn't give the man an erection. What it does is that when he is subjectively aroused, it makes it easier to become objectively aroused and to maintain his erection. That's the advantage of Viagra and Cialis. And then using it as an anti-anxiety medication, which is half of its function, the other half is to increase the efficacy of your vascular system, is fine. Now, here's where it's really problematic, and that is where nobody gets the results that you see in the ads. Nobody, period, exclamation point. Even among the best Viagra and Cialis users, they don't get 100% predictable erections. They usually get between 65 and 85% erections, which is good, not bad. But the dropout rate is high because they feel they're the only one in LA who's failed at Viagra. If you base it on the ads, everybody's failed. If you think about Viagra as an additional resource, both anti-anxiety and firmness of erection, that's its good use. The thing that's interesting about medical interventions is that the more invasive the intervention, the more effective it is. But it's more difficult to integrate it into couple sexual style. So for instance, penile injections are much more efficient for getting erections than Viagra or Cialis. But for penile injections to work, the partner's got to feel that they have a role in there. The man who goes into the bathroom, injects himself, comes out with an erection, immediately wants to go to intercourse, that is not going, that you're going to have that high dropout rate. Because the partner says, I don't understand what's going on, it's not. And often he has a hard time reaching orgasm because he's not turned on. The reason he's not reaching orgasm, he's not turned on, even though he's got objectively a firm erection, he doesn't have subjective arousal. And that's the other thing in treatment, that a message that is very hard for people to accept, but I think is really a true message, is that subjective arousal is more important than objective arousal. It really is true. Feeling turned on is more important than having an erection. The reason, ejaculatory inhibition, which we don't talk about enough with men, especially men over 50, because I think it's as many as 15% of men have trouble with ejaculatory inhibition, is that the reason he doesn't reach orgasm is that his penis is lying. His penis says, I'm turned on, but he's not really subjectively aroused. And he's trying to have sex like he had sex when he was in his 20s, just doing thrusting. The key element in overcoming ejaculatory inhibition is don't transition to intercourse until you're a 7, 8, or even a 9 in terms of subjective arousal, and then do multiple stimulation during intercourse. Don't do just thrusting. Is that too much, or is that?
No, that's wonderful. I'm kind of processing that and just wondering, you saw the transition from guys who were having much more sex when they really weren't that turned on because of, now they can with Viagra.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say it's been generally beneficial to couples and clients?
If they use it the way it's supposed to be used, which is to integrate it in their couple sexual style, it's been helpful. It's caused more non-sexual relationships than anything else in history. Not because it's not a good drug, but nobody tells the man about these 2 guidelines about transition intercourse when you're highly turned on and doing multiple stimulation, and adopt a good enough sex model. Let me say one last thing to make sure we get it in. What I'm a big behavioral person in terms of psychosexual skill exercises. The psychosexual skill exercise that I think has the most value, and Michael did it probably with 2,000 men before he died, and I've probably done it probably not 2,000, maybe 1,800 men. And that is the exercise of waxing and waning of erections. Neither Michael or I ever did it with a man who enjoyed it. It's just not an enjoyable exercise, but it's a crucial exercise. It's kind of an anti-panic exercise. And that is, when the man is turned on, you stop stimulation so his erection wanes. If he stays relaxed, mindful, and open to sensual and playful touch, his erection will wax again. Let him lose it again. Let it wane a second time. Don't go to intercourse until your 3rd erection. All men that I've met, personally and professionally, prefer to go to intercourse on their 1st erection, which I think is a great preference. It's a terrible mandate. You've got to understand your penis, and don't be the enemy of your penis. Be the friend of your penis. Understand that it's okay for penises to be variable and flexible.
Yeah, one of the things that I will talk about with guys sometimes is if lubrication in a female waxes and wanes, we don't know.
Most of the time. Does.
Yeah, of course it does. But it's obviously not as visible.
Right. Your erection is more visible.
Yes. And so to clarify that waxing and waning technique, you're letting the situation and all of the erotic charge of it create the erection. You're not trying to jerk him off to get the erection. It's just letting it happen.
You're not. Again, it's about pleasure, not about orgasm and performance. Mm-hmm. So you're trying to play, and your body responds with an erection. If you stop, your erection will wane. Mm-hmm. If you become obsessed with your penis and panic and apologize, your erection will never wax again. Mm-hmm. But if you're mindful, relaxed, and open to sensual and playful touch, your erection will wax again. Let it wane a second time, and then go to intercourse and orgasm on the 3rd erection. And it isn't because I'm in favor of 3rd erections. Mm-hmm. I really want him to understand, be nicer to himself and to his penis, to understand it's normal. One other point, whether you're using Cialis or Viagra or not, or even if you're using injections, the likelihood is that whether it happens once a month, once every 10 times, or once a year, you will not have an erection sufficient for intercourse. The man is cured when he doesn't have an erection sufficient for intercourse, and he can accept it without panicking or apologizing. That's the cure for erectile dysfunction.
Oh, I love it. That's so good. Thank you so much. So what's, you've done a lot of work over the years. You've been at this for multiple decades. What are you most proud of?
Well, the thing that I think about my legacy, Well, Michael died about 6 years ago, and I gave a presentation at a conference about his legacy. And for his legacy was the good enough sex model. I think Michael would still roll in his grave if he would be so frustrated the good enough sex model has not been adopted, especially by physicians. I really think that that's key. When I think about my legacy, I think about my legacy being about a couple approach to desire, especially this idea of valuing both intimacy and eroticism and positive realistic expectations. You know, I'm always in favor of positive experiences, but the real test of a couple is when they have a lousy experience, can they turn toward each other and shrug it off or laugh it off and say, let's be sexual again in a day or two. We're more awake, alert, and really receptive and responsive. So the legacy that I would like to people think about me is about desire issues and about relapse prevention, about how you maintain healthy sexuality in an ongoing relationship.
Wonderful. And I like even thinking about it with the waxing and waning exercise. We talk about what the male is learning, but also what his partner is learning about penises and waxing and waning, and both of them being on the same page of achieving that good enough sex.
The whole idea that there's so many more similarities and differences between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that book that sold so many copies back in the 80s, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus?
Mm-hmm.
There's no science to that at all. He's a very nice man, but there's no science to that.
Okay.
That's just the opposite is true.
Yeah.
And I do think the reason good enough sex sells much better with women is it fits their sexual socialization about variable, flexible sex. And that, when I teach my undergraduates, I still teach an undergraduate sex class at American University. And there's always more women than men take the class. But that one of the themes for men is you want to be a wise man, and wise men think of women as intimate and erotic friends.
Love it. And gosh, those kids are so lucky over at American University getting that class as a part of it.
You think about it as primary prevention. Think about it as a clinician, you're always doing tertiary intervention.
Mm-hmm.
It would be so much better. And again, one of the things with books, although I think books work much better when you're in therapy, is self-help books. But sometimes when they work well, the self-help book really helps somebody do secondary prevention. That says, I didn't know that. Now I know it. I feel so much better about myself as a sexual person.
Yeah, great. Okay. And all this work that you're doing, it seems like at some point you and your wife started working as a team.
Right. Emily and I have been married for a long time. We've been married 52 years. We come from non-middle class backgrounds. We were the first ones in our family ever graduate college. We have a lot of pride in what we've created as individuals and as a couple. Mm-hmm. But it's been fun writing together. Her background is not mental health, it's speech communication. Mm-hmm. And I think her approach really does put a humanness and a nitty-grittiness to it. I mean, I talk more as a scientist and she talks more as a human being.
Okay. And you guys, do you also present together, or it's mainly the writing together?
No, it's the writing together that we do. Many years ago, I tried to talk her into switching careers and getting into the field. And she says, I love what I do now. Sex therapy is a weird profession.
It is pretty weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, well, thank you so much for agreeing to this. You've made such incredible contributions to the field with your writing, and I can tell from just these dozen or so questions what a depth of knowledge you have on this subject, and you were offering really good advice to our listeners. I really appreciate that.
Well, it's been fun.
Okay,
I hope
good.
it is helpful.
Yes, I know it will be. All right. Well, thank you again. And what are you working on now?
No, I love to work and I love presenting. I would love to present to lay public, but I present to professionals mostly. The second book that we're now working on, which supposedly is going to come out in the summer, is called Enhancing Couple Sexuality, Creating an Intimate and Erotic Bond. And then the book that'll come out in 2020 is the third edition of Rekindling Desire.
Okay. And
so I like doing that. The book that I'd love to write, if I can get a contract for it, is about what women need to understand about male sexuality that would be good for her, for him, and for the couple. So that's a book that's in the back of my head.
Okay. So for all the agents out there listening, where can they find you if they need to get a hold of you for that?
Probably the best place is by email. So it's barrymccarthy43@gmail.com.
Okay. Do you tweet? Do you get out in the social media sphere?
I don't. I probably should, but everybody. One of the things that has been helpful to clients in talking to me is I have this notion that everybody has their strengths and everybody has their vulnerabilities. And for somebody who writes as much as I do, I have a perceptual motor learning disorder, so that I cannot do computers and I cannot type.
Oh, man.
So it's really, as the world becomes more online, as you said, the social media, I am totally overwhelmed. I mean, to write an email for me, like an email to you, I would imagine it takes you 30 seconds. For me, it takes me about 7 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, then thank you more times over for all the work that you've done writing, because that sounds like it was quite a feat.
I'd love to do it. And it's my line that you need to own your vulnerabilities, but don't give them control. It's like what we say about trauma. You want to own it. You want to learn from it. You don't want to give it control.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tweet probably 10 different quotes from you following this over the next couple of weeks, because there are some absolute gems in here. Thank you again, Dr. Barry McCarthy, and I hope to run into you out in the field.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks to the show's executive producer, Robin Morrison. Thanks to Kat Murphy, director of social media. Thanks to Team Scrub for the music. Thanks to the sound engineer, Ravi Carmen. Thanks to Brian Hui for naming the show. Thanks to Alex Pitts for the intro. Thanks to Arlene Asuncion for the logo. You can find this podcast at hardconversationspodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. You can locate me on Twitter at TimNortonLCSW or on my website for my private practice, timnortontherapy.com. You can also email us at hardconversationspodcast@gmail.com or call into our hotline at 662-626-4276. That's 662-MAN-HARD. Thanks to all my friends and family for brainstorming this show with me. Shoutouts to the sex positive community, including sex educators, sex therapists, sex coaches, other fellow sex podcasters, sex surrogates, academics, the sexual health medical community, sex workers, the tantric community, and everybody else involved with having hard conversations. Bye-bye.